Hello and welcome to today's session, What's New in SAP Datasphere, the Q4 edition of 2023. So today we're covering the final quarter of 2023 and the features and functions we delivered or enhanced during that time span. My name is Klaus Peter-Sauer. I'm part of the product management team for SAP Datasphere, and I'm going to guide you through a lot of the new features together with my colleagues here during this session. So let's have a look at the different topics we're going to cover today. So we're basically covering updates in all areas of the product, like general product updates at the beginning, then of course covering data integration topics, modeling, consumption topics, but also administrative and BW Bridge updates. And at the end, we will give you an outlook also on what to expect in the first few months or quarters of 2024. So giving you a brief outlook on what's happening in this year. So let's directly start into the general updates. So the first update we have, and most of you who are already users of SAP Datasphere notice that by October timeframe, so with wave 21, we renovated the home screen, so it's redesigned now with some new elements. So it consists now of several cards. They come with an optional auto refresh feature, which you can select or deselect. And also certain customizations are possible, like turning off cards, turning on cards, or select quick actions. So selecting actions which you often use so that you can directly jump there from the home screen. You can also rearrange the tiles and put things on top which you regularly use. So let's directly look at the system here, how that looks like. So you find that renovated screen here, and the spaces, data builder, artifacts, business builder, and you can customize what is shown here to you with these toggles, with the welcome card, the different elements, quick actions. So I enabled everything. That's also the standard and default setting. And you can now have some certain specific settings to tiles, for example, only showing errors, not only all the successful data integration task runs, for example, or for the data builder. You could filter deeper on certain artifacts. And on the quick actions, I haven't defined them yet, but you could select, for example, if you're more an admin type of person or modeler, create space or analytic model or any other of these functions, and then you would get these kind of quick action buttons on your home screen. And that's already about it. That auto refresh feature, that's what you find on the top right. By default, this is set to off. You can enable it, and then it will auto refresh the automation every now and then. Then let's have a look to the next part, and that is we enhanced our data center availability to new data centers. So we already onboarded earlier in the year a Google Cloud Platform with a data center in the US. Now this data center, as well as the new data centers in Europe, EU 30, as well as in India in IN 30, have been enabled for all the different licensing options, like the cloud platform enterprise agreement, subscription, and so on. So those can be found or listed in the Discovery Center as well. Then another topic, we enhance the flexible tenant configuration. So what you find in your administration and configuration area in your tenant, with updates for adding premium outbound integration as well as catalog, and also resizing tenants is now possible, so that as a self-service capability here. So also with a near zero downtime effect, so that upsizing your customer HANA underneath Datasphere wouldn't need additional downtime to that. So there are also on the right hand side of the screen, you will see that in a second also here in the demo, there are some cards available depending on the settings you make, with showing you the allocated hours based on your settings in the flexible tenant configuration, as well as the used hours, like used execution hours or used storage, as an example, and also showing over usage in case you crossed the allocation limit you have. That will be shown, but only in case over usage is actually registered. So looking at that feature in the system, you find that, as I mentioned, in your configuration area under tenant configuration, and here you will also get these new areas like the premium outbound integration, catalog, and as I mentioned, these tiles show up on the right hand side. For the premium outbound, the tile only shows if you've assigned already some capacity unit blocks to it. What is also shown here is another new feature you will find on the next slide I'm going to talk about, which is that flag here to enable the HANA Cloud script server. And by doing that, let me just switch back to the slides here. By doing that, you actually enable that for the whole tenant via this flexible tenant configuration setting. Before that, this was a ticket-based process where you would need to open a ticket on the incident system, and then our cloud support colleagues would enable that for you. Now this can be done by each and every customer on that tenant on your own. So very nice addition here, and that rounds it off with the general updates and the administration updates here at the beginning. So looking at the next area with data integration and data management, where we added also a good number of new features and functions. The first one is that we added to the existing replication flow capability new targets, and also, as you can see here in the dark blue, a new source, which is for that part Datasphere itself. So local tables can be a source for replication flows now with release 24. And as you see on the right hand side, also depicted in the darker blue color here on the graphic, we added non-SAP target systems, including Google BigQuery, Google Cloud Storage, Azure Data Lake Generation 2, and also Amazon Simple Storage S3. And this is now the official, recommended and certified way to get SAP data from SAP Datasphere or other sources through SAP Datasphere to non-SAP target systems. So there's also, with that arrival of this new functionality, a series of blogs out there on the SAP community. I will show you that in a second here, but this is a new and great feature with this premium outbound integration, which we saw just a few minutes ago, also in the flexible tenant configuration, where the sizing and the capacity units can be assigned to the premium outbound topic, and therefore using the metering to get this enabled. So looking at it a little bit more detailed, the premium outbound has a variety of different configuration options here, depending on which target you're going to use. So looking at Google BigQuery on top here on the slide, initial data load capabilities are supported for various sources. There is the usage of the Google Append API as a write mode, and that allows replication into the target tables on Google BigQuery without a primary key, and also allows users to access and copy the create table statement there. And there's also in the documentation, and I will show you the online documentation pages here, a very detailed description on all the different settings and additional handling on that specifically for the Google BigQuery target. On the other hand, for those third-party object stores, also initial data load capabilities are available. And then, of course, since these are file-based systems, right, it supports a variety of different file formats, like the traditional CSV, but also Parquet, JSON, and JSON lines. And also, depending on that file format, there are different specific properties available. And yeah, also that is quite well documented on the online help documentation. And with release 25, we added another target, which is Apache Kafka for replication flows now. So that release now allows leveraging SAP data and event streaming scenarios. Also there we released a blog which describes this Kafka integration, and that what is described in the blog online, that doesn't only cover what was released in release 2023-25, but also with the first release there was some additional enhancements made to the Kafka integration there with release 2024-01, which is delivered in mid of January. And then an additional enhancement was made also with the final release of the 2023 year with 25. We enabled the configuration of additional parallelization option here. So the possibility to adjust the replication thread limit. And you see that in the screenshots here a little bit. I can show you that also live in the system in a second. On the left hand side for the source, you can have a source setting the replication threads, as well as on the target side, both using that cogwheel icon on the top right or top left, and then giving you different options depending on the source, of course, right? So you see on the bottom screenshot there is specifically for Google Cloud Storage. There are different settings there, so that depends really on what kind of target you're picking. So let's have a look at the blogs first. So talked about that we have a series of blog posts out there regarding specifically these new additional capabilities on the replication flow. So there's a series currently with 4 blogs. Here the first one giving you an overview on the new additions here to the replication flow capability. Second one covering specifically in detail that premium outbound integration topic. The third one covering specifically the Kafka integration. And the fourth one, since this always goes in line, how do I size this in terms of how many capacity units do I need to assign for my specific scenario or scenarios, whatever you have there. And that is what I would like you to give, to read, sorry, and that's quite detailed information, what we have there. And let's have a look at the system shortly. So in the replication flow, which should be a known functionality by now, we have additional sources. So I added now Datasphere as the new source, and if you go on the settings, right, so we can have those replication thread limits adjusted. So the standard is 10. I leave it at that, but you can adjust that according to your needs. And then on the target side, I used here an existing target, which was there before, HANA Cloud, right? But also same thing here, replication thread limit on the target side can be set. And we can also select different target here, depending on what is configured, what kind of system connectivity is available. So I could set it here to Azure Data Lake or Amazon S3 or Google Cloud Storage, right? So if I pick these, then of course I would need to adjust the premium outbound configuration on the flexible tenant configuration, what I showed you earlier, right? So this is not set in this system, but if I do that, then of course I can use that. And of course, this whole topic is deeply integrated into the known data integration monitor, etc., where you can monitor the status and everything. Looking at the help pages, that's what I also talked about earlier on the slides. There is a quite detailed documentation on replication flow, on these new targets here, specifically for the BigQuery as a target. Quite detailed description, same thing here for Kafka, and of course also for the other cloud storage providers, which goes into some level of detail here for you. Okay, that's it from the replication flow perspective. So let's go back to the slides. There is one more smaller feature which I want to make you aware of, and that is regarding view persistency. So on the view persistency side, up until this release of 2023-24, the default execution mode was always synchronous execution. We changed the behavior now that the default behavior is now asynchronous, which increases the stability of the executions on the application server, of course, right? And you can, if you want, always turn that back to synchronous. So this is a setting which can be made anytime. Just wanted to make you aware that the standard behavior has changed now. The default is now asynchronous. So with that, my first part is done, and I would like to hand it over to my colleague Jan Fetzer for updates on the data modeling side.
We are happy to announce the advent of the external hierarchies with directory. And that is a much enhanced feature set for the hierarchies. And we do this by introducing a new object type that you see on the slide, and that is a semantic usage that we call hierarchy with directory. Now, what is this? Here we're introducing a hierarchy model that is very much akin to what S4 and BW do hierarchies-wise, and they have long been a lot more flexible than we are in Datasphere. And this is true for a lot of respects. So on the one hand side, and that is all in these bullets here, is that parent-child hierarchies are defined in a data-driven way. So far, when you define a parent-child relationship, it is something that you model metadata wise. You tell it what is the parent, what is the child, and then it's exactly this one hierarchy. And now, because there is a business requirement to have more than one hierarchy, we are introducing the way that just by essentially adding some additional sort of records in the central hierarchy table, there are more hierarchies around. And we'll see how this looks in the system in a second. And this is true for any number of parallel hierarchies. And this is something we're seeing a lot in financials, we're seeing a lot in HR, that a lot of parallel hierarchies are being set up that can be compared and that people sort of look at, that are time dependent, that my org chart differs next year from this year. And this is why this year's org chart is being sort of held separate to next year's org chart in that hierarchy table. So, and then something that is super central to the new concept is that nodes don't need to be of the same type as the leaves. And now what does that mean? So far, hierarchies mean in the parent-child case that all nodes are of the same type. So if you have a manager-employee hierarchy, the manager is herself also an employee. And now here we're introducing something new and saying, a node, like a text node, is just a grouping element. It's not the thing that it's actually grouping. So if you have a group of GL accounts, this group is in and out of itself not a GL account, it's a group. And the same is true for other text nodes. If you have cost center groups and cost centers, so this is just a text node. And if we play this a bit larger, this doesn't need to be a text node. It could be a full-fledged dimension. So they could be a sales area, it could be a cost center, it could be an employee. And those three dimensions form the hierarchy with possible, again, text nodes between them. It's just another dimension, possibly a very trivial one because it just has a text, or a possibly really big one because it's a sales area. Then language descriptions or hierarchy descriptions and those of the nodes can be fully language dependent. And we see that here on the slides, and we'll see this in the demo as well, that the name of the hierarchy, as are the nodes within the hierarchy, all of those may have language dependent texts. And then as a last very important point, these hierarchies can themselves be time dependent. So if I'm setting up the org chart of next year, then obviously I don't want this to be active now. I set it to active next year. And so we have had this notion of time dependency for quite some time. And now we're introducing this also for hierarchies. And by the same token for hierarchy nodes and obviously their attributes as well. And all of this boils down to making the whole hierarchy game a much enlarged, giving it a much enlarged feature set, and aligning itself with S4 and BW hierarchies, and essentially being able to consume those with minimal effort. And what this exactly means we'll come to in a second. But let's first look at how this looks in the system. So if here I am looking at a model, I am looking at a normal analytic model that has in the underlying modeling, and we'll see that, the hierarchy setup. And so if I preview on this, I need to set my variables. And here this time reference date for the time dependency, we leave it at today, so that's fine. So here I have normal aggregations, but I want to see this by product ID. And the product ID brings its text, and we'll see later on that this is also a language dependent text. All of this has been known for quite some time. And what is now new is that there are several hierarchies on that product ID that I can choose from. And here what has been set up for me is a men's, women's, kids hierarchy, as well as a premium, standard, low marketing hierarchy. And I'm choosing the first one. And then subsequently, I see my numbers, and I can sort of drop those keys to make it nicer. I see both the nodes and the respective products underneath. I see them with their language dependent text. I see the roll up on the top node level. And if I now change my data access language and say, I don't only want to see my UI in another language. So that's been active for quite some time. But by the same token, I also want to see my data, meaning the content of the data that I'm seeing in, also in French. Then I would be able, so there's French. So I do that. And now I see all of my UI elements naturally in French. So here, all the menus and so on. So that's been there for quite some time. But what is, and also that the products bring their language dependent text. So we do this here. So we drill by, again, the product ID. There's no, and so those products come with their respective texts, and what is important, by the same token, also the hierarchies come in, are translated. Now this is data, so the men's, kids, men, women, kids, hierarchy became hommes, femmes, enfants, and so I can totally choose that. That was the name of the hierarchy, and by the same token, if I let now only concentrate on the descriptions, so those nodes themselves come in French as well. So that's neat. Now the question is, how do we do this on a modeling front? And for that, it's possibly easiest to go via the ER model. And so here we have the overarching ER model, and the important elements here, I want to point this out. So is here on the one hand side, the fact, where there are my sales order items. They are about products, and the product is a normal dimension. Now we're coming to the weeds of this product because there's a hierarchy on this product. And for that, so before we look directly at the hierarchy itself, we want to look at sort of the surrounding objects around the hierarchy, because there's a certain complexity to the hierarchy, and we want to sort of build this up slowly. So on the one hand side, there is a thing that we call a hierarchy directory. And a hierarchy directory is a list of all the hierarchies that the system is aware of. And this is where this time dependency also kicks in. And so here we have 3 hierarchies. And out of these 3 hierarchies, they have different validities. And we haven't seen this in the demo. I'll come back to this later. So the hierarchy 1 is valid forever. The hierarchy 2 is valid until end of 2023, whereas a hierarchy 4 only starts being valid in 2024 until the end of life. And to that hierarchy, which is itself just a normal dimension, there can be, like for any dimension, language-dependent texts. So these hierarchies, with their keys, for given languages, can have different descriptions. So this is where the language-dependent description in the hierarchy selection came from. Then we said that the product is only a leaf in the hierarchy, but there are other dimensions. And so in our case, there is a product hierarchy node dimension that in our case is just there to display texts. So it's super trivial, but this could be a full-fledged dimension. Picture this being a sales area. So then it would have a lot more attributes than just these here. And because it is a dimension, it can also have a language-dependent text. So if you have language-independent text, there could be a description of that main object. But if you want it to be language-dependent, you need to have a text entity, and this text entity then contains the descriptions of your nodes. Now we're coming to sort of the core object of it all, and that is the hierarchy, and there's a certain complexity to it. And that reason for having this complexity is that, richness of features that we want to provide, and also the necessary alignment that we're having with ES4 colleagues. And so this, in essence, we need to have these 6 columns here. So on the one hand side, each and every row needs to say, for which hierarchy am I responsible for? So which hierarchy are we talking about? And there are several of those. So there are elements in the hierarchy 1, and there are other elements in the hierarchy 2. So this is why earlier on when I was saying these are data-driven hierarchies, If there were more elements in this hierarchy, product hierarchy table, and more elements in this hierarchy directory, then we'd have more hierarchies. So this is totally data-driven dynamic game. Then there are two columns that spell out the parent-child relationship. And obviously we made this trivial with two layers, so just parent men and child, then this bike or that bike. But this could obviously be of any depth. And there are two columns spelling out this parent-child relationship, and it's always two columns. And then we have, for each row, we have a definition of, okay, what type of dimension am I looking at? Am I looking at the original, which is the product? Am I looking at something else, which in this case it is the text node? And essentially these texts are arbitrary. They are used, and we'll see this in the configuration in a second, for redirecting over to the corresponding keys, either for products or for text nodes or for yet more dimensions. So if there were more dimensions participating, we would have here more columns. And the important thing to understand, and the real only complexity in what we're introducing here, is this redirection. That the child 42 is a product, and as a product, it has a product key that goes by the name HB hyphen something. Whereas the child 100 is itself a text node, and its key is to be looked up in another column, and it goes by the name of men. And so this is how we can also read from the data that this child 42, the HB, is under parent IE 102, and 102 is the text node with the key kids. And so this redirection tells the system how to do its joins in the background. And this redirection is important because there could be overlapping number ranges. So there could be a product ABC and a text node ABC. And if we just said ABC is parent or child to XYZ, this would be identical. And in order to keep those namespaces separate, there is a redirection of what is the parent-child relationship on the one hand side, and what is the actual key that is used for identifying the dimension member of the product, of the text, of the sales area, of the whatever, at runtime. And so because this hierarchy really links out both to the product and here to the text node, but it could totally associate to other dimensions as well if those were participating in the hierarchy. And so this logic of how to read this table, this is now incorporated in this UI. And initially, with the first release, this UI is something that you will need to fill. Over time, BW Bridge, and S4 will provide the metadata on the hierarchies, and this will be sort of filled in the background. So for us, it was important to sort of bring the runtime and the design time for this whole more flexible hierarchy object, and eventually this will become a lot more convenient over time. And now this UI gives the system the interpretation information for making sense of this hierarchy. So it needs to say, which is the column that contains the parent, which is the single one column that contains the child. Then there's one column that identifies which hierarchy are we actually talking about. We had these three different hierarchies, so which one of those three is it? Which one of those additional 5 that we can invent in a data-driven way is it? And there needs to be a link out, so a association to that object, and in our case, the object goes by the name of hierarchy directory. And then there's one column, and we had this here, that spells out which type of node are we talking about when a given child ID comes along. And so each and every row needs to say, ooh, this is my node type, and this text essentially is arbitrary. But all of these texts need to be listed here. So there are various values in this node type column. And we in our table had just 2 of them. Product node on the one hand side as a text, or text node at the other. But this could be A and B, 1, 2, 3, whatever. It's just that there is one property of the child that defines in which column to look out for the real dimension key. And so in the case of product, the So for the text product node, the column to look at is the product ID column. And we want this to be leaves of our hierarchy. Whereas the text, when there is text in this column, we want the system to look in this other column text node ID. But there could be more. So there could be additional composite keys. So of my dimension, this would totally work and would fully be supported with time dependency and language dependency, all of that. It would still be a single column child ID, but it would potentially point out to various key columns like controlling area and cost center, or even a client field or so. Yes, and with that, we are essentially through. We saw this thing about the time dependency. I missed to point this out in the demo, so we are still in French. Now let's look at the hierarchy that we'll see in 2024. And interestingly, there will be other hierarchies that are being pulled there, because then the hierarchies, there will be not only the men, women's, kid, but there will be on the new 24th strategy. And so this showcases that the second hierarchy, the one about flagship products, is no longer the one in that time at that reference date, but instead it's the strategy for 2024, which is the hierarchy. And obviously this could be totally overlapping, and this could be a growing list, not one replacing the other. This is just a question of the validity in the hierarchy directory table. So in the slides, you have access to the data model, pretty intensive sort of look at information on data and the various elements that participate in here, and also an example and interpretation of the UI. So you can easily read up on that.
Thank you, Jan. And now let's move on to the next topic, which is semantic onboarding. So what we enabled here is basically bringing together functionality which was pretty much spread out over the different screens and functionality. So we're providing one central entry point now with semantic onboarding and bringing together various functions which were already there before, but as I mentioned, quite spread all over the place. So on the one hand side, you will see the import entities functionality, and also having harmonized those existing import options. I can show you that in the system in a second. So the wizards and the way how this metadata is onboarded is harmonized now, looks pretty much the same for the different sources with S4HANA Cloud, S4HANA On-Prem, BW and BW4HANA. Since business content is also a vital part of our semantic onboarding journey, this content network was also rearranged. So you find this also now in the semantic onboarding section, where you can bring in pre-built SAP or third-party business content as an accelerator to start your projects. And thirdly, also data products, also something which was available before on the data marketplace, right, and is still available on the data marketplace, has now been also brought to this central screen, since data products is also a way which we in the future also will further build out to specifically onboard data products which we want to provide, but also data products you defined in your system, right, as a basis. So it's mainly about harmonizing, centralizing the access to these areas, right? And prerequisites is S4HANA Cloud, of course, for the cloud-based version, and for on-prem it's 16.10 as a release or higher. So let's have a brief look at the system, how that looks like. Let me just move over here. So in the system, you will find on the menu bar on the left-hand side a new entry, just here below the data marketplace, and in between the business builder and the data marketplace, semantic onboarding. And that's where you find these entries, what you've seen on the screenshot before, right? So on the top hand side, this entity import functionality, which was, yeah, as I said, spread all over different places for S/4HANA Cloud. And if I go there, you will see that this kind of import wizard now looks pretty similar for all the different options here. This was the cloud-based one. This is the on-prem one, right? We see different sources, of course, but we have the same kind of three-step approach. Also, same thing here on the BW side with selecting the connections, the entities, review it, and then being able to import it. In the middle section here, as mentioned, the business content with the sample business content, the SAP delivered content here in the middle, and the third-party business content option here to the right. And below you find the data products, which are allowed for you and the context of that data product. So you see here private data product which I created for test purposes earlier. I can get access to all the publicly available data products and other contexts which allow me and my user to access. Okay, that's it pretty much from the semantic onboarding part. Going back to the slides and moving to the next topic, which is OData support. And this was also quite well awaited by many customers, partners, to make the analytic model, which is the new model type we introduced in March 23, to the system now also being or having that model also facing outbound support with using the OData interface here. That is now possible for the data as well as for the metadata. As you see it here, it works in the same way as the OData interface worked before. It's just an enhancement of the analytic model itself, in addition to the existing view exposure which was there before. Right, there's also what you can see here, additional features being included for consumption, like measure aggregation, the dimensions, associations, text associations, and exception aggregation. And also an important enhancement, what we made to the OData interface is now that we are supporting views with parameters. So that's now also a new capability to the OData interface. And if you want to know more, showed you the online documentation earlier. That's exactly also where you find additional information, more details around this. And with that, I would like to hand it over to Mona to give us an update on the catalog.
We have one feature in this last release for SAP Datasphere, and this is around supporting custom roles for catalog. Previously, we were not exposing the catalog specific privileges in the roles page, which meant that customers were not able to mix and match and create a role which is more suitable to their organizational setup. But now we would be exposing all the privileges for the catalog as it relates to both catalog administrator as well as the catalog user. Mix match can happen and custom roles can be created. So here we have our standard catalog administrator role, and as you can see, we have exposed a lot of privileges here as it relates to CRUD rights on the catalog asset, glossary, tag hierarchy, system, and these relate to you want some users to be able to monitor the system, or some users to just manage the tag hierarchy, and so on and so forth. I have pre-created a role here called Catalog Steward, and the steward is responsible for the glossary management. And we have given them just read on the assets, and on glossary they have the rights. and then they don't have ability to, manipulate the tag hierarchy or look at the KPI object itself. Now let's see how this user will experience the system. So I'm now logged in as a catalog steward role, and I'm going to click on the catalog. I can see the assets, terms, favorites, and recent, but KPIs are missing because if you remember, we did not give read on KPI to this user. And but we did give them ability to manage the glossary, and those options are enabled here.
Thank you, Mona. And in this next section, administration and BW Bridge, we will also stay in the area of roles, and we have a new topic we introduced over various waves in a phased approach in different data centers. So what we call space-dependent permissions or scoped roles. What's behind this idea is basically to get more flexible and more granular authorization concepts, get them established in Datasphere. So basically giving different authorizations across spaces, and so simplifying the onboarding of new users. And yeah, what you see in the graphic here, a scoped role is now a centerpiece on the authorization management. It can be based on a standard role, or could also be a custom role defined by you specifically, and where multiple users are assigned to, and also multiple spaces are assigned to. And so it's also available to use SAML attributes to allocate users, and also the CLI, so the command line interface API, is supported, and we have a quite detailed blog out on the community. Showed you the community earlier, so that's where you find more information. But maybe let's take a step back and look at the authorizations concept before introducing scoped roles. So before that release of scoped roles with wave 23 and 24 of 2023, basic access on a user level is given to people accessing the Datasphere tenant as such, right? So the next level is then assigning roles to users, giving them dedicated privileges to use certain functionalities, and then assigning those users to spaces by a space administrator or the system administrator. And if you want to go a little deeper even than space level, then you could also have row level security with data access control being established there. There was one problem which we now address with scope roles, is that here the challenge that if a user would need different roles in different spaces, meaning he should be a modeler in one space and only a viewer in another space, and maybe a space administrator in a third space, that with this existing capabilities was not possible so far. If a modeler role was assigned, this modeler role took place in all the spaces a user is assigned to. So we introduce now the concept of scoped roles, which is an object in their own right. So scoped role is an additional role concept here. With that example here with John Smith, who is a viewer in the space sales and a modeler in the space R&D. So these kind of concepts can now be addressed. So how does it work? So basically looking at the concept of global standard and custom roles, these are the basis for the scoped roles. What you see here in the graphic, pretty much the same graphic I showed earlier, with focus now on the standard role on top, where we have chosen the data warehouse modeler role. Could be a different role, that's just the example here. Could be also a custom role assigned to a scoped role, and then the scoped role then selects which users should use this and which spaces are assigned to this, right? So a lot of theory. Maybe let's move to the system to better understand how it works. So where we need to go is in the security area, in the role management. That's where we find on top here the different standard delivered roles we have in the system. You see there's one developer custom role, and we have defined 6 scoped roles, and let's define another one. Let's just call it, for simplicity purposes, KP test. Then the first screen I get into is selecting that role template. Let's say we want to define one which is based on the standard DW modeler role. I will do that. And now you could adjust it if you want to, or directly assign a scope. So need to save it first. Let's do that. And then select or assign a scope. Let's pick, for example, my demo space and save that. So you see one scope is selected, and then I can do the user assignment. So no assignments made yet. Let me assign a user and maybe look for my friend Dominic and assign him here as a user to the space. You see this scope is selected separately, as I already assigned that in the different step. You get a review page, and then I defined a very simple scoped role with one user, one space. Could be multiple, of course, right? This is just for demonstration purposes and simplicity reasons. Okay, then there is another smaller new feature which I also wanted to make you aware of, and that is that data access controls. We saw it in the overview on the different methods of user authorization earlier. Data access controls now also support repository packages. So repository packages have been introduced earlier in the year, and now this also works together with data access controls, that you basically can assign them to packages and then transport them throughout your landscape. Small but important feature, right? Which also with the assignment of a data access control package checks for consistency, etc. Let's look at the updates on the BW Bridge side with release 23.11. So there are a couple of updates here allowing first and foremost metadata override from BW for HANA to the BW Bridge. This is a quite neat feature, as many customers do a gradual migration approach and move first scenarios over, but then typically after that first move, life doesn't stop and change requests are day-to-day business. So the models change and could change on either side, and this option now lets you synchronize basically your BW for HANA and your BW Bridge system, and so that's a quite nice addition which we have. Same thing is applied on the BW for HANA side. That's why this feature is also, of course, now delivered with the 2023 release. Another interesting one is enabling the constant selection feature in Datasphere, also for the model import of the BW Bridge. So a few months back, we added the content selection feature to the analytic model in Datasphere, so as a native functionality of the analytic model. And now we also enhanced the model import functionality for the BW Bridge, that in case you have content selection already in your BW Bridge models, you can now actually use this, and the import entities function is automatically delivering the content selection feature to your model in Datasphere. Another interesting one here is that there's a new view capability for delta extraction to Datasphere. So if you want to move data from the bridge to Datasphere, there's now a view available which lets you access or load the delta records. This is a nice feature addition. And then earlier in the session, Jan explained about a new hierarchy features, the hierarchy with directory. And that feature is now also leveraged by the import functionality from the BW Bridge, that this feature now is automatically created, or the hierarchies with directory are automatically created based on the metadata on the BW Bridge side. And that allows you a seamless transition from BW Bridge to a native Datasphere artifact. And looking at the last topic, which is a cold store option, or specifically data tiering optimization. Many of you know from BW for HANA to store data in a cold store. That is now also available as an option for the BW Bridge in combination with the optional data lake for Datasphere. So if you have both BW Bridge and the data lake option available in your tenant, you can now use this cold store option as part of the BW Bridge implementation. In our last chapter today, let's look forward and check what we plan for 2024 and beyond. So what's planned for the first half this year and should already be delivered now in January is the folder support, and for better organizing your objects in the data builder was planned for end of last year, didn't quite make it, but should be there by January. If everything goes wrong, then supporting Confluent Kafka. I talked about Kafka as a target earlier, and so we plan on supporting specifically the Confluent Kafka as target and a source in replication flow. Also on the same topic with replication flow, supporting real-time execution and being able to schedule replication flows with also enabling flexible scalability. Then another point on the security topic, we will add a quite flexible Booleans operator on the data access control, making it more flexible with wildcards, etc., allowing these ranges, wildcards, etc., on data access control, and also later in 2024 we'll make the Skim API available. Then we will extend the data marketplace also with license specific data selection on the marketplace via CLI, unified discovery of data products in the metadata catalog. Then we're working on namespaces and also stacking of analytic models with a central measure definition, supporting also display and navigation attributes. Non-cumulative key figure, big topic we're working on for everyone who works with stock level kind of values, also known from BW or BW for HANA. We're working on a translation dashboard for multilingual content support. On demand computing for peak consumption scenarios. And then looking further into the future, we will expand also the data center coverage We had that topic at the very beginning of the session today with Google Cloud Platform as well as Microsoft Azure. We will add an option with SQL script and spill-to-disk support for transformation flows. The catalog will be enhanced as we did it over the past months with different crawling capabilities for BW, for S4HANA and ECC, and also SAP HANA systems later in the year. Semantic onboarding will be further built out with supporting calculation views later this year. Also adding data products which go beyond the traditional or classic relational data products in the data marketplace. Gen AI plays a core part on what we plan on delivering, and then also further extending the analytic model with multi-fact modeling and business layer support there. Just giving you a glimpse and a brief overview on what we're working on. And then if you're looking for further information, you find this on this final slide here with various links to our learning pages, release navigator, etc., etc. So with that, we're at the end of our session today. Thanks for being here with us. Also thank you to my colleagues for preparing the content. And yeah, stay safe. Thanks everyone, and bye-bye.